Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back again to Compass Points, the podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, events, and anything else that gets our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above. And I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing great. Moving into November, and the leaves are falling and chills in the air. It's nice.
Leaves are falling. Campaign mailers are overflowing the mailboxes.
I did have some sources tell me there is an election next week, so I'm gonna.
And that is one of the things we're going to talk about today, probably a fair amount. Early voting wrapped up, and so we'll be reviewing that, talking about one local race in particular that has generated a lot of conversation this week, although most of it from one side. We had some interesting news out of the University of Tennessee having to do with beer sales at Neyland Stadium. We're going to talk about that. Some changes in how the Knox County school system is approaching racial and economic disparities. We had a major development in the, up until this past week, unsolved arson that burned down the Planned Parenthood building. Mm-hmm. So we are going to talk about that. But before we do any of these things, Scott, do you know what we're going to do?
Well, we have probably the most important news of the day.
What is that?
It is Lord Seth Barber's birthday.
Lord Seth Barber, our producer, it's your birthday?
It is my birthday, fellas.
We are taping here on Friday, November 4th, and it's Seth's birthday. And you know what, Seth? I stopped on the way here. We know you have the title, the nobility of being Lord Seth Barber. And
paid good money for it.
We thought that every lord deserves his own castle. So we got you this is a bottle of Castle and Key small batch Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
Well, that's fantastic.
Happy birthday.
Enjoy.
Thank you so much. And I feel so bad because I'm immediately going to charge you for my services. So
that's okay. That's on us. I haven't had that bourbon. It came highly recommended, and also I thought it was appropriate to a gentleman of your title.
Well, again, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We will, however, spare both you and our listeners the traditional singing of Happy Birthday because nobody wants to hear me and Scott sing.
Well, plus that makes more work for me. I have to go get the rights and take care of that.
That's right.
So that's an issue I don't want to deal with. So thanks for that. I'll take that as the birthday gift.
All right. Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
So, turning back to our news, Scott, tell us what we learned about the arson at the Planned Parenthood building on Cherry Street.
Well, we learnd who did it.
Who they say did it.
Who they say did it, and he has unfortunately passed, or for him, passed away. So there's no way to know, what his side of the story is. But the FBI has determined that Mark Thomas Reno, who is from Jefferson City, was responsible for the arson. In fact, he was already in custody for shooting up the John Duncan Federal Building in downtown Knoxville. And it's interesting. The investigations were kind of intertwined. They might not have caught him for shooting into the federal building had it not been for the fact that he was under surveillance as a suspect for the Planned Parenthood.
So he was a suspect in the Planned Parenthood thing. They were following him, tracking him, and then he went and shot.
Yeah, it went shot at the federal building. But it was real interesting. He is also the one who was responsible for shooting into Planned Parenthood months before the arson, and so they really wrapped up several cases with one suspect. But the interesting thing was, of course, since he was in custody, fell ill, and died in hospital while he was in custody. So in Kentucky, so there was no criminal charge against him. And
because they had arrested him for the shooting of the federal building, but they hadn't yet brought charges in the Planned Parenthood case. Right?
Correct. So what the FBI did is they went to seize his property that he used in the commission of those crimes, and they made those court filings. Planned Parenthood knew about it, called a press conference, and we, got the word from them. But the upshot was, from the timeline that they gave, he went to the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. They don't know if they don't have any evidence that he went into the Capitol, but he was there. He's on video being there, and apparently right after that, he fired a shotgun into the front door of Planned Parenthood early in the morning.
Right. This was in January of 2021.
Right, and it was kind of interesting. One of the things that had not come out before this court filing was he used these incendiary shells that they're mostly, I believe, magnesium, but they shoot out flame in addition to just the pellets. So it looks like, I had to go online to look at it, and it looks like a flamethrower. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of insane. It didn't catch the building on fire. It just
but that may have been his intent.
It may have been his intent. We'll never know.
Right.
But then later on New Year's Eve, the early morning hours of New Year's Eve on 2021, he apparently went and took a can of gasoline and a book of matches and set the Planned Parenthood building on fire, completely destroyed it. They did have, for both of those incidents, they did have an eyewitness. Mm-hmm. So they got a description of his vehicle. They didn't get a license tag number or anything, but they had vehicle descriptions. One of the vehicles that he was using was a red pickup truck. Well, fast forward a few months, and a fire investigator saw a red pickup truck at an event in downtown Knoxville. Not sure what that event was, but they thought was the same truck. Mm-hmm. And so he went and struck up a conversation with Reno, and didn't identify himself as a fire investigator, just chatting with him. And Reno starts talking about all kinds of stuff he was opposed to, and abortion. That
made him seem like somebody who might burn down a Planned Parenthood.
And actually, the fire investigator, who was not named, I wish we could name him, but he wasn't named in the FBI court filings, had another encounter with him. More conversations followed. Enough information was gathered that the FBI was able to get a court order to put these tracking devices on his vehicles. Mm-hmm. And so they did. And the tracking devices helped, after he shot up the Duncan building earlier this year. They looked at the tracking device information, and it tracked him. He's driving around downtown Knoxville, around the Duncan building, and all the way home to his house. So then they got a search warrant for his house and found evidence for all the crimes there. So they arrested him for the Duncan building shooting. But as you said earlier, they had not charged him with the arson, but apparently they were planning to at some point before he passed away. So
right, and he was 63 years old. We don't know how he died. It was in custody. He got ill, obviously, because he was taken to a hospital. So we don't know if this was COVID, a heart attack, like what it was exactly. But there was some medical issue, and then he died. And it's interesting because you can look up and find his obituaries online, which ran in August when he died. And of course, it doesn't mention any of this.
It didn't mention that that
he was in custody at the time. Well, so I think one thing about this is since those attacks on Planned Parenthood, there's been a lot of talk in sort of maybe the local progressive community or people who care about reproductive rights, raising questions about how come nobody's been arrested? Are these crimes being taken seriously? Is anybody really investigating this? One thing this made clear was that, yes, they very much were taking it seriously and investigating it from the very beginning, and actually had caught the guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the
guy
things,
who they think did it.
Yeah, that's one of the things about criminal investigations, especially anytime you have the federal government involved, is that they do them secretly. They don't. They don't announce that, we have we have a suspect, we have things like that. They don't do that. And so to the out, when you're on the outside, it appears nothing is happening, but they actually are working these cases, and that's and this is a perfect example of that, where when you read the affidavit that the FBI special agent filed in the civil forfeiture case for the property, you realize how much work they actually did put into it. And they had, like I said, they had eyewitnesses to both the shooting at the clinic and the arson. They had descriptions of the vehicles. They had security cam video, both from Planned Parenthood and from area businesses, where they could see what direction the vehicle left in and that sort of thing. So and they don't divulge all that until they need to. And and really, if they hadn't filed a suit to seize the two vehicles and one of the weapons used in federal court, we might not even ever know, because they don't talk about people they don't charge.
Right. They can't charge him because he's dead.
They can't charge him because he's dead, so they can't. They're not going to charge him, so they don't usually talk about those kinds of things. But
so, what did Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and Northern Mississippi have to say about the resolution of this?
Well, I mean, obviously they were thankful to the authorities for resolving it. But one of the big things was that they were pointing out that this appears to be one of those instances where political speech turns into physical violence, and that they believe that Reno was radicalized. He went to the January 6th insurrection in 2021, and then almost immediately thereafter started this spree of crimes. And then but they were pointing out that extremism appears to be on the rise, that people are not, that these, the rhetoric where you say, we're going to fight against something which has always been metaphorical, is becoming literal, and people are committing violence because of political disputes.
Right. Well, and actually, we're going to talk about that again here in a couple of minutes, related to one of our local elections. Moving on, we had a story this week about some changes in the school system under new superintendent John Ryswick. Has sort of shifted the way the system is approaching issues of racial and economic disparities. Basically, for the last 8 years, the school system has had a formal, ongoing process. It started under former Superintendent Jim McIntyre, was continued under Superintendent Bob Thomas, who followed him and who just retired in June, to identify and track disparities both in academic achievement among students and disciplinary outcomes for students. So like which students get suspended the most or get in trouble the most at school. Breaking those categories out by race, but also by socioeconomic status, looking at economically disadvantaged students, also students who are special education students, students who are English second language speakers, and kind of looking at all these different subgroups. And when they had a task force initially, 2014-15, that issued a report in 2016 that basically showed that there were huge disparities in all of those things. Maybe not surprising if you know about socioeconomics in our country, but still it put very specific data to these numbers that basically black students are much more likely to get suspended than white students overall, and also economically students from lower economic backgrounds much more likely to get in trouble at school, and also both of those groups tend to underperform on state standardized tests significantly to white students. And so having identified that, the school system then kind of constructed a steering committee to kind of guide this, come up with some suggested approaches, which the school system has undertaken. They've actually done many of the things that were recommended, which had to do with better training for teachers and staff in sort of like cultural and racial sensitivities or competency, as they called it. Putting a real emphasis on recruiting more minority teachers and staff members and principals, just like kind of a range of things. And they have been kind of working along on those. But as this process went on and this community advisory group, the name of it changed a few times, but it kind of stayed in constant operation for about 8 years, would have quarterly public meetings where they would bring out the latest data. The data never really got better. So they've kind of been talking about this for 8 years and have put several things in place, but so far those things have not shown real payoff. And of course we had the pandemic in there. Like there's been lots of other things happening in the school system, obviously, that could affect all of this. But it's the last few years, because I've been going to these meetings, it has started to take on a sort of repetitive feel where we're kind of just hearing the same numbers over and over again, and they're not really getting better. So Ryswick told the school board last month, and this isn't something that they made a big public announcement of. It came up in a school board work session. But he was asked, the most recent manifestation of this effort has been something called the Alliance for Educational Equity, which has been made up of community volunteers, essentially, with assistance from school system staff. And there hasn't been a meeting of it since Ryswick took over in June. The web page is still there on the school board website, but there's nothing listing any future activities or meetings or anything. And so a school board member asked, and he basically said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to call another meeting of that group. He didn't exactly say it was disbanded, but functionally, it's essentially been disbanded. So he's not doing that. So then the question was, okay, what are you going to do? Yeah. And he has had from the beginning 4 priorities that he has set out. And you can see them on the school system website, and they have to do with basically ensuring, the biggest one is success for every student. That's kind of the overarching thing. We want success for every student. That they want to have excellent teachers. I honestly can't remember the other 2, even though I've heard them repeated many times. But you can go to the school system website on the superintendent's page and see his top 4 priorities. And his argument is essentially, look, if we're doing the things that I am focusing on, that I say are really our action goals, these issues of disparities are going to be taken care of in the course of that, because if we're really pursuing success for every student, then that means, black students as well as white students, economically disadvantaged students as well as affluent students, and also that the kind of regional approach that he's taking, where he's broken up the school system into 5 different regions, which are going to have these kind of intensive, they will have community committees of parents and community members, committees of teachers who will be meeting regularly to talk about issues within their schools, that there will be, he says, more specific focus, because it'll be at the areas, where they actually see the problems and can try to address them. A few of the school board members who have been active in that other process. Daniel Watson, who was the board representative to the Alliance for Educational Equity, Reverend John Butler, who just was elected to the school board, but as a community leader was part of the original task force that kind of put all this in motion. They are kind of taking not exactly what I'd call a wait and see approach, because I think they're trying to apply pressure themselves to say, we want to make sure, like, they're saying, we understand what the superintendent is trying to do and we think it can work, but also we believe that if you don't put constant, specific, explicit pressure on these issues of disparities, they're not going to get better. It's true that we've been talking about them for 8 years and they haven't gotten better, but also they didn't get better. Like, those disparities didn't arrive overnight. They didn't get better during the however many decades before that you weren't talking about them explicitly either. So, you know, I think that one context, the broader context that is hard not to pull into it is that, of course, we do have a partisan school board now. It does have a Republican majority. The Republican Party at the national level, the state level, if not necessarily the local level, has really been pushing in recent years on issues of equity and diversity from an oppositional standpoint. Of course, there was a lot of talk about so-called critical race theory, but it's kind of gone beyond that to now you'll see a lot of conservative commentators raising questions about the whole issue. Like, a lot of organizations now, whether they're public or private, have like what they call DEI committees, diversity, equity, and inclusion committees. Those have become kind of common things coming out of the Obama era. Another big push for them in 2020 after all the protests and everything. And there's been a pushback against that from the conservative side, saying we don't need to be talking so much about diversity, equity, that these things themselves foster a sort of, quote unquote, reverse racism, or can lead to discrimination against white people in the workplace or whatever. And that kind of, this is a misguided focus. And so I think it's hard not to see the pullback at the local level in really openly embracing that kind of conversation as being related, even if it's not explicitly, still being influenced by that broader conversation.
Yeah, and in education in general, that is a thing that's going on. The Supreme Court is considering a case on college admissions right now.
Right.
They're probably talking about it even as we speak.
Yeah.
About and this idea that you as I think Ross as mentioned, you kind of you work for everybody and it will improve the lots of lower income students and African American students and Hispanic students and I mean there is an appeal to that, but it is a real problem with especially the educational outcomes, and if you don't there's in business schools they've got a mantra: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and so if you don't pay attention to things like that, there is the danger that you won't address them.
And we're talking about a lot of students here too, because by the time you add up sort of all the racial minorities in the school, economically disadvantaged students, special education students, you're well over. You're probably getting up to like 40% of the school population total. So if those different subcategories of students are not succeeding, then it's going to be hard for the school system as a whole to succeed, which I think is really Ryswick's point. But it will be interesting to see as we move forward to what degree that reluctance or resistance to talking specifically about racial disparities, specifically about economic disparities, if that becomes more pronounced on the school board or this administration. Okay, sticking with school, but in a very different way.
Yes.
The University of Tennessee started selling beer at Neyland Stadium 3 years ago in 2019, and we had some news about that this week.
Yes, the Aramark is the contractor who sells beer at sporting events in the venues that UT runs. Neyland Stadium, of course, Thompson Bowling Arena, soccer stadium, the baseball stadium. But they have to get a beer permit from the city, like any other business does. They have had a little problem this year with selling to underage. Actually, they're police cadets. They're undercover operatives of the police department, and they've racked up 3 this year, and that triggers under the city ordinance a revocation and a suspension hearing for your beer permit. So now Aramark is going to have to go before a hearing officer and make the case of why their beer permit shouldn't be suspended.
And they have multiple permits at Neyland, we should say, right? This is sort of the permit that covers the general admissions area.
Right. They've got multiple permits. This is for the what they call the bowl, the general stuff. They got another one for the skyboxes. Thompson Bowling Arena has 2 as well. And all these permits are different, so this only affects the bowl at Neyland Stadium, the general admission area at Neyland Stadium. Of course, that's where about 100,000 people come to ball games. And now this isn't going to these violations occurred because basically these cadets went in dressed normally and had their own IDs, presented their IDs, and either they weren't checked or they were, in one instance, they checked the ID and sold them beer anyway, and so these citations have been made. This works for any establishment that does it. I mean, they're no different than the tavern down the street, but now they are going to have to go make their case as to why they shouldn't have their beer permit for the bowl suspended. And the city is asking them for a suspension of 60 days. That includes 3 home games, so that would be 3 games next year. And so,
and what does that mean to the university?
To the university, it means about $500,000.
Wow.
Based on 2021 beer sales. Now, they usually get an average. Last year they got an average about 167,000 a game. It varies wildly with the opponent.
May depend on the time of day too.
Yeah, it may. I didn't look at what time kickoff was for the various games last year, but the Georgia game and the Florida game by far had the most beer sales, and then the other games that they had where they didn't have they had some smaller college opponents that came in as kind of the punching bags that they usually have a couple of those beer sales were way down out there. And the first 3 games next season, if they have their permit restricted or suspended, the first 3 games are Austin Peay, the University of Texas at San Antonio, and South Carolina. And so 2 of the 3 games are against smaller school opponents that probably will not generate the beer sales that later in the season when they do play Florida and Georgia again, those probably
if they had to write off 3 games, those are 3.
Those are the 3 that they would write off. So, but we'll see. I mean, one of the things is this is and Aramark brought this up when they had to have had to talk to the beer board about this before this all happened. Is that the volume of sales there? I mean, you essentially got the equivalent of more than half of the population of the city of Knoxville in one location, and so it's a lot of people, a lot of customers there, a lot of people buying beer, and so it makes it if you had a city half the size of Knoxville that only had 3 underage sales in a year citywide, you'd go, think that's pretty good, but this is in one location. And, but the beer board, which is made up of city council members, they wear different hats, and that's the beer board hat. They said basically it's no excuse. You knew what you were getting into when you got this permit. You knew what the rules were, and you're not following the rules. And so we'll find out. There's going to be the actual hearing has not been set, but a pre-hearing conference where they might work out a deal. If there's a deal to be made, will be held in December. So.
Well, and we should say that when they say there's only been 3 out of however many, we don't actually know that because those were the 3 cadets who got served.
Those were the 3 cadets who got served. There could have been hundreds who got served.
Which I think would be the argument from the regulatory side is these are the ones we caught. We don't know how many you're actually serving.
Yeah, because they don't, the way they don't cite people for, if you see somebody who buys beer and then walk away, the police don't go up to them and say, "Hey, how old are you? Can you buy that?" They don't do that.
Right.
They send their own cadets in, and the cadets are people age 18 to 21 who can't yet become police officers, but they're very interested in police work.
Also the age of college students.
And also the age of college students, and also below the age where you can buy alcohol. Mm-hmm. So makes it pretty much a no-brainer for the police to use them. But they use them to buy. So if there's one cadet and 20 college students, they go to this one particular stand, and none of them get carded. They only get 1 citation.
Right.
So.
Yep. All right. Well, it's we knew it would be potentially complicated when UT took on alcohol sales at their venues, and I think UT, I'm sure, knew it would be complicated too. On the other hand, as you mentioned, they probably figure it's worth the hassle for the money they get from it.
Yeah, and one of the things that was kind of interesting, and I didn't when I look back at the history of the beer sales there. They've got a history of actually doing this. I mean, the first year they were in business, they had 7 citations at the Garth Brooks concert at Neyland Stadium. So, I mean, but what they've done in the past, if you get a couple of sales within a 2-year period, you submit a remediation plan, and that's it. There's no, not even a slap on the wrist. You just do that. Well. They've done that before too, where they'll get 2 in a year. And then what they did was they applied for a different permit. And there was always a reason. One year the SEC changed its rules, so they had to change their rules and ask for a new permit. They did another thing where the physical layout changed, and they asked for another permit. They won't be able to do that this time because if... they can't get a new permit while this one is suspended. So really, it's going to be one of those things where you've got basically the hearing officer, who is a local attorney who has agreed to do this for the city, will be hearing the case and making a decision on whether beer gets sold at Neyland Stadium for at least 3 games next year.
All right. Well, we've talked about school, we've talked about abortion and arson, we've talked about bourbon and beer, but we have not yet talked about the election, which is, as of today, Sunday, when this podcast will be posted, the election is only 2 days away. So I think a couple things that we probably ought to hit on. First of all, early voting wrapped up this past Thursday, and we got some final numbers on that pretty much bear out the trends that we had seen throughout, right?
Yeah. It's turnout is light compared to 4 years ago when these same offices were on the ballot. There's one big difference is 4 years ago we had the U.S. Senate race between Marsha Blackburn and Phil Bredesen, which was it generated a lot of interest. So that probably drove the turnout up. But turnout's way down. It's interesting how the Election Commission has put out some information on the demographics. As we pointed out last week, and
I want to say, when we say turnout is way down, just to be specific, I think it's about 60%, around 61% of what it was in 2018 for the early and absentee ballots.
Right. But the the demographic trends, the baby boomers, people 60 and over, overwhelmingly outnumber everybody else who's voting. And we mentioned that last week, and it bears repeating again, since people still have the opportunity to go to the polls. Young people are not voting very, in high numbers. That's common. And as we talked about last week, the people 30 to 50 who were the ones who, have kids going to school, they're buying houses, all that stuff, they're not voting in large numbers. So,
yeah, I was just going to look at the some of those actual numbers, because it is really striking. Of course, now I can't. I should have had the press release called up already. It's right. It's right here on my phone. Just bear with me, folks. But I mean, it was basically like, I think 25,000 or so people over the age of 70 voted.
Yeah.
I mean, that's people over the age of 70.
Right.
And only about 72,000 people total voted. So about a third of the ballots that have been cast so far are by people over 70. And then the next biggest group is that group from 60 to 70, which is like another 12 or 13,000 on top of that. And so this still, as we said last week, this looks like, what it looks like is a normal midterm election turnout.
Yeah.
2018, 4 years ago, did have that very active Senate race with Marsha Blackburn and Phil Bredesen. It also had an open governor's seat, and so I think the governor's race that year generated, especially on the Republican side, some more energy. But a typical midterm election is, and this is true in Knox County, and it's also true in most of the country, is going to be older, whiter, and more Republican than the voting base overall. That's what this looks like right now. Now, maybe all those people who are going to vote are, not voting in traditional ways, and we'll see that on Tuesday. But at the moment, this looks like a normal midterm, basically.
Yeah. But and unfortunately, a normal midterm means low voter turnout.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that people who take a look at big picture look at democracy and how government or how elections go really bemoan, because you can be a minority in the overall population, a political minority, but you can win an election, and then you have an outsized influence or power relative to your actual numbers.
Yep. Well, and that certainly has been true in general over the years. We have always said older people vote more, white populations, predominantly white precincts vote in higher numbers than predominantly non-white precincts. All of these things are things that we've seen typically over the years, and that's what this turnout so far looks like.
The breakdown by state house district confirms that. The district in southwest Knoxville, where Farragut is located, largely white, largely a lot, may skew older, not sure, but they're voting in higher numbers than the other.
Very Republican
district, very Republican
precinct, too,
and also
district.
The 18th district, the West Knox County and down into South Knox County, is voting at a high rate. Of course, there's a really bitter race going on in that one.
Yes. So let's talk about that. Yes, the 18th district race, it kind of made news every day this week, and a lot of this was basically arguments or recriminations over campaign mailers and TV ads and so forth. So what happened there?
Yeah, in the district, it is represented by Eddie Manis, who is a moderate Republican who decided not to run for re-election. Greg Kaplan is a Democrat who's running against Elaine Davis, Republican. She's been very active in Republican politics, and she actually
does not
parties.
position herself as a moderate Republican.
She is not a moderate Republican. She is a very conservative Republican and proud of it. And Kaplan has said that he got into the race to run against extremism. He kind of has positioned himself as a moderate Democrat, but very much has tried to kind of get across that he's much more of an Eddie Manis, out of the Eddie Manis mold, than and certainly more so than Elaine Davis. But the state Republican Party has entered into the fray, and they have put out mailers, and
I think we have.
We have
there's
a
a lot
few.
of mailers in this race.
Yes, a lot of trees have been sacrificed for democracy in Knox County.
I think that this is one of the ones that people have raised concerns about. This is one of the ones. So what have been Kaplan? Kaplan issued some press releases, and then ultimately he and Gloria Johnson, the district who's running in District 90 as a Democrat, called a press conference to talk about this. What are his specific complaints about the Republican ads?
Well, one of the things is the photos that they're using of him are photoshopped. Essentially, they're
distorted a little bit
to make him look more sinister. They accuse him or his friends of supporting mutilation of children through sexual reassignment surgery. They also say that he is in favor of defunding the police, things like that, and he has his primary complaint is that they're mischaracterizing his stances on the issues.
Those things aren't true.
Those things are not true. In fact, he said that he supported the city of Knoxville's raising the pay of police officers, which is one of the drivers of the tax increase that city voters have or city residents are having to pay. And he's also not in favor of sexual reassignment surgeries for minors, and he says that it's just wrong. You just got it, flat wrong. But one of the other things is these distortions of his image and then this thing about the mutilation of children is also. And we mentioned this last week. It is it's something that's been done for centuries to vilify Jewish people.
Which Kaplan is
and
Jewish.
Kaplan is
Important
Jewish.
part of this.
Yes, he is Jewish. Now, they're sending out similar ads about Gloria Johnson, and she is not Jewish. But it is particularly galling to him that that this is going on. He actually he's a University of Tennessee professor, a Spanish professor, and one of his areas of expertise is the Spanish Inquisition, and this was very common. This is one of the things that led to the Inquisition.
Right. They said that Jewish people murdered children and drank their blood. And this kind of
rituals. And all kinds of stuff like that. In fact, that is that part of it, especially, prompted the Knoxville Jewish Alliance to weigh in this week, condemning the attacks on Kaplan for that very reason. This is a lot of the prominent Jewish institutions in the city are in the 18th district in West Knoxville.
Yep.
We've got the temple and the synagogue are both there. We've got the Arnstein Jewish Center, the Jewish Day School. All these institutions are there, and there is a and one of the things, this is part of a nationwide trend, one of the things that the Jewish community is concerned about all across the country is this rising tide of anti-Semitic rhetoric and actions, as the controversy over Kanye West's comments show. So,
and what was Elaine Davis or the Knox County Republican Party's response, if any, to any of this?
None. Essentially, Elaine Davis hasn't responded. The state Republican Party, which is actually funding this strategy, has not responded to questions. Daniel Herrera, the local Knox County Republican Party chair, said to me that, well, this is a state party thing. It's not, I have nothing to do with it. The local party has nothing to do with it. So he was kind of that. And by getting the state party to do it, there is some plausible deniability that that Davis and Herrera and anybody else in Knox County can have. Say, oh, it's the state people who are doing it. But it is in this race, and it is a race that could be fairly close. And either the negative, if negative ads work, then it might tip things in favor of Davis, and if there's a reaction against the negative ads, it could benefit Kaplan. So.
Well, and it was interesting. Eddie Manis, who has not maybe pointedly has not endorsed anybody in this race, and still hasn't endorsed anybody, but he did come out. He told Victor Ashe in his new Sentinel column that he was disturbed by the mailer and did suggest that some people would see it as being anti-Jewish. Yeah,
and it's interesting. Another person in the political world who has not come out and endorsed anybody in this is Janet Testerman, who ran against Davis in the Republican primary and lost. And she serves on city council, and she is also a more moderate Republican, and she's been silent on this. I think there are a lot of moderate Republicans who may not come out and say that they are going to support Kaplan over Davis, but apparently either are supporting Kaplan or just not going to support anybody. He's got some campaign contributions from people who are generally Republican donors, but we'll see. It's an interesting dynamic, and this heated rhetoric has added to that.
All right. Well, we will obviously see the results of all of that on Tuesday, and we will be back here next week to talk about and analyze and try to figure out what the heck happened. We do not have an interview this week, but let's go ahead and take a break, Seth, just so people can hear our nice theme music. And we are to the Q&A portion of our podcast. Every week we invite our readers on our subscriber-only Facebook page, the Compass Colloquy, to tell us if anything that they would like to hear talked about on the podcast. Sometimes this gives us good news tips. There are things that we can't actually immediately turn around and talk about on the podcast because we need to do reporting first. But we did get a couple of questions this week that we can shed a little bit of light on, and they basically had to do with relationships between some of our local elected officials. And I think this is an interesting topic because it's something that we kind of don't report on a regular basis, like is the mayor getting along with so-and-so or whatever. It's more just kind of the ongoing daily political reality. But it is interesting to occasionally step back and look at these things. So one question that came was that President Biden has clearly run into some issues with getting parts of his agenda through Congress, especially in the Senate, partly because he has people on his own team, especially Senators Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who have not been on board with all of his projects and have voted against them or not let them come to a vote. And so the question was, well, do either of our local mayors face this with our local legislative bodies, county commission or city council? So what would you covered the city, what would you say to that from the city side?
Well, on the city side, the short answer is no. We've got 9 members of the city council. One member, Amelia Parker, is the one most likely to push back on things that Mayor India Kincannon wants to put forward. She's a fairly reliable no vote on a lot of things, but she's the only one. Councilwoman Seema Singh sometimes joins Parker in dissenting against the proposals the mayor puts forward, but not all the time.
Right. They've both been kind of skeptical about some things having to do with the stadium, for example.
They're both real big stadium skeptics. Both are concerned about policing, and so there's they've got some common ground. Of course, they both kind of came out of the city council movement, and so they are similar in that sense. But one of the overarching things, and this is a systemic thing, I think, is that city council members are, the primary is in a geographic district, but the general election for all of them is they're citywide.
Right.
So this very same electorate elects the mayor and elects every single city council member. So it stands to reason that whoever the mayor is and a majority of council members will be pretty much on the same page. They may not be identical, but they're, probably have the same outlook on government. Same thing, back in the 90s when Victor Ashe was the mayor, same thing could be said to city council then. They were mostly pro-business Republicans, just like Ashe was pro-business Republican.
That was kind of the Knoxville political mainstream.
That was the mainstream there. That was the Knoxville electorate at that point in time. Knoxville electorate now is more progressive than it was then, and you've got Mayor Kincannon and the majority of the council members are they're all nonpartisan races, but we all know they're Democrats. So they're all are very similar. So there aren't one of the things about the Senate, you were talking about the mansion, is that it already is divided. It's half Republican and half Democratic. There is no such division in the city, so the dissenting voices are usually just one or two.
Right. Well, and on the county side, it's a little bit different because county commission obviously is mostly made up of district representatives who are only elected within their own districts, although there are 2 at large who are elected countywide. So you could theoretically get much greater differences between the interests of, the 5th district in Farragut and the 8th district in Corryton. But overall, the commission is dominated by Republicans because the county overall is more Republican than Democratic, somewhere between 55 and 60% in presidential elections, usually Republican. And the way the districts are drawn up, the kind of Democratic voters are more concentrated in the urban districts. So while you could have starker divides on commission, you still have such a strong Republican majority and you have a Republican mayor. So you have 9 out of 11 commissioners right now are Republican and you have a Republican mayor. There's not a really strong ideological difference. At the same time, as there is on council often, there can be differences in strategy or approach to say, like, well, we understand the issue that you, the mayor, are trying to address here, but we, the legislators, think maybe there's a couple of steps you're missing. So I don't feel like we often see our mayors blocked by our legislatures, but I do think that we often see things delayed for further discussion, or, they'll say we want to have a workshop. Pretty common for both council and commission to say with a complicated issue, we want to have a workshop about this before we vote on it. And the other thing that happens, I can say from having worked inside the city, is that certainly on the city side, and I think this happens on the county side as well, a mayor typically will not bring a proposal to council or commission unless they're pretty sure it's going to pass.
Right.
Like the worst thing a mayor can do politically is to look weak by bringing something forward that then fails. And mayors can talk individually to members of city council or county commission. So you can literally, kind of round up your votes and try to answer any questions and deal with any concerns behind the scenes before something comes and actually is voted on. And so I think that sometimes people look at council and commission and the fact that they approve almost, not everything, but almost everything that's brought to them by the city and county mayors. And you can say, well, this is basically a rubber stamp system. But I think it's more complex than that. I think the mayors are always in conversation and dialogue with council and commission. And if they fail to do that, as we saw with Mayor Kincannon recently when there was the talk about changes to planning staff, she hadn't vetted that at all, really, it seemed like, with city council. And they pushed back and it got delayed. And now they're going to talk about it some more. And probably it'll end up happening, but they're going to make her, kind of justify it and work for it. Yeah. So I think that neither the city or county mayor can take for granted that, just because I tell them to do something, they're going to do it.
Yeah, but the ultimately, the mayors are in a pretty strong position, especially the city mayor, because the city mayor, both Kincannon and before him, Rohero, your former boss, were fond of saying that a budget is an expression of policy. And so one of the things about the budget process is council members can't go through a budget line by line. They can't approve or disapprove of specific programs. They can only supply dollar amounts for different departments. And if the police department wants to spend it on one thing, even though council members might not like it, they can do it.
Right.
And so
this is the strong mayor system.
Strong mayor system, yeah. And so the mayor does have just inherently a lot more power to make sure that their agenda goes through and gets funded. And like you said, they shouldn't. They can't take it for granted, but they're the ones who ultimately are in control of the pocketbook.
Right. They're playing with a strong hand. And, it's a little bit different in the county. The county is not a strong mayor system, partly because the mayor directly oversees only about, a quarter to a third of the budget because, it's about 60 to 65% of the budget is the school system, the spending of which is under the authority of the school board. The mayor has no authority over that. And then another 10% or so is the sheriff's office, which again, the sheriff is independently elected. And so the mayor is responsible for sort of bringing all of those budgets together and proposing them to commission each year, but does not have direct control over the majority of the county budget. And so it's a somewhat different situation. But again, Mayor Jacobs has had essentially no pushback on any of the budgets that he's put forward. Mayor Kincannon, even in proposing a tax increase last year, had very little pushback. So yes, the short answer is no. There's no Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema situation in the city or the county, and structurally it would be kind of hard. Not impossible, but it would be hard for them to end up in that situation. Another question somewhat related to this was, just looking at the county side, because we do have all these different entities in the county that are independently elected. It seems like, the question was, it seems like there's less conflict right now between the county mayor, the sheriff, the school system, commission than we have seen sometimes in the past. Is that just because they all get along better? Is it because they're more alike, sort of ideologically? And I think, yes, I think both of those things are true. I think right now we have a sort of cast of characters in those positions who do mostly get along or manage to get along in public anyway. Mayor Jacobs got along pretty well with former school superintendent Bob Thomas. They had a little bit of friction over the whole plan to move the school system out of the AJ building and into the TVA tower. But that was resolved. They came to an agreement on it. And overall, they got along well. New school superintendent John Ryswick Mayor Jacobs was one of the references that he provided on his job application for the job. And so he and Mayor Jacobs are obviously pretty close. And also the school board and county commission, which in both your and my past experience as local government reporters, we've often documented some significant conflicts between those two bodies, including lawsuits. I mean, things have gotten pretty tense in that relationship sometimes. But in the last, especially since former and controversial Superintendent Jim McIntyre departed, the school board and the county commission have been trying, I think, to work together. They have a joint education committee made up of 4 members of each that just gets together to talk regularly. And we are at the moment, I would say, seeing a period of, pretty much peace across the, not that there aren't little flare-ups. Everybody's got their little turf issues that are going to come up, but we are not getting a lot of headlines out of conflicts on the county side right now.
Yeah, one of the things is, and I don't know if it's because there are no conflicts or few, but one of the things that made Black Wednesday such a watershed event was before Black Wednesday in the early 2000s, late 90s, when there was a conflict among county commissioners and other county elected officials and all, they would fight like crazy and stab each other in the back privately. But very little of that bubbled up to the surface. But when
you had to, something would happen, and then we as reporters would have to go and be like, okay, what actually happened? Who talked to who?
Yeah, but when after Black Wednesday, when especially the rival factions of then Sheriff Tim Hutchison and then Mayor Mike Ragsdale kind of came out in the open, and they told tales on each other and all this thing. All of a sudden, I mean, it went from darkness to daylight as far as the goings on, the kind of behind the scenes stuff that we found out as reporters found out about, and that might be waning. They might be less willing to go public with some of their minor disputes, and quite frankly, some of these disputes that different political people have are quite minor and silly.
They can be very petty. Well, and I do think, another thing, thinking about who's in those positions in the county right now, where we've had those conflicts in the past, you mentioned Hutchison. Hutchison was a very ambitious sheriff. He wanted to be not just the sheriff, but sort of the, super sheriff. He accumulated a lot of power unto himself during his, and part of this had to do with not having term limits. He was in office for 16 years, I believe, a long time. And he was a bit of an empire builder in lots of ways. And that runs up against other people's ambitions. And I think what we've had more recently is people staying a little bit more in their lanes. Sheriff Tom Spangler, I don't get any sense that he has ambitions to do anything but run the sheriff's office the way he wants to run it. But he's not looking to build any grand new buildings or anything. Hutchison was trying to build this giant downtown justice center, among other things. And Ryswick, he may have ambitions that go beyond being superintendent of Knox County schools, but I don't think any of his ambitions are in conflict with, we talk about Mayor Jacobs' ambitions. A lot of people think he's thinking about running for governor, but that ambition is not in conflict with anybody else's ambition. So kind of everybody can be ambitious within their own domain, and as long as they're not stepping on each other's toes too much, we kind of avoid those fights. And so that's a period we're in now. It doesn't mean it will last forever. Political conflicts come and go, and they are very dependent kind of on the actual personalities and egos of the people who hold these offices. So
that's true.
But at the moment, things overall are pretty quiet on those fronts. All right, looking ahead to the coming week. Obviously, the big news this coming week, the big thing we're going to be writing about and talking about is the election. It is on Tuesday, November 8th. If you were not among those 70,000 or so people who voted during early voting, this is going to be your only chance. Polls will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can find voting information and precinct locations on the website at knoxvotes.org. Also, the school board is going to be having its monthly meetings, workshop on Monday and voting meeting on Wednesday. One issue they're going to be talking about is looking for a new lobbyist since, as we reported last month, they have disassociated with the coalition of large school systems that they had been part of for about the last 15 years and had been lobbying alongside Nashville, Memphis, and Chattanooga. Now they're going to be off on their own, and they will probably need somebody kind of helping them with that. So they'll be talking about that. And then on Thursday, the Planning Commission is meeting.
Planning Commission is meeting. One of the big things that they're doing is they're going to be revising the city and county South Sector plans to bring the commercial areas along Alcoa Highway kind of more in sync with each other. The property right along Alcoa Highway, thanks to finger annexation, is basically a patchwork of city parcels, county parcels, that sort of thing, and they have two different zoning codes. But one of the things the plan's going to do is going to take all that commercial property and call for them to be mixed use zoning, both in the city and in the county, kind of the closest thing they have to the same zone, so that commercial, a broad range of commercial activity would be allowed. But they've got to change this sector plan, and that's going to be probably the highlight of what they're going to be doing on Thursday.
All right. Well, we will talk about all of that, and probably especially the election when we come back next week. So everybody, have a good one.
Well, one thing we need to tell them about the election.
What's that?
Is if they haven't decided who they're going to vote for.
Yes. Or
what they're going to vote for, they need to go to be a subscriber, to go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe. And actually, you don't need to be a subscriber to get the political.
That's right. We have moved all of our election coverage outside the paywall. Yes. It's linked from our front page on the website, CompassKnox.com. Give it a look if you have not read it. And, if you have any questions, you can also contact us. Our contact information is on the website, and I have already, as you probably have too, Scott, been contacted by a good number of voters just looking for clarification. A lot of those ballot, the proposed state constitutional amendments, a lot of people are still kind of confused about those. Yes. So we are also available. You can give us an email or even a phone call, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Seth, once again, thank you.
Happy birthday.
And happy birthday.
Lord Seth Barber.
Thank you, fellas.
Our theme music is by Will Wright.
See y'all next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.